Hey everyone, welcome to today's video where we're gonna look at NEO swap infrastructure in more detail. We're gonna have a quick update on the lithium carbonate price, and finally also have a check on the latest 2 weeks of weekly insurance delivery numbers, since they were the 2 weeks of the Chinese New Year. But going to the swap infrastructure, I think it's a very interesting development that's kind of happening right now. But before we go into the swap infrastructure numbers and details, let's have a quick look on the weekly update. You can see that over the past 4 or 5 updates now, starting from the early January of this year, NIO and Xpeng in white are outselling Tesla in China. This is going back all the way to actually the last 2 weeks of last year in 2024, the second half of December. These two smaller companies again outsold Tesla. So now we have essentially 6, 7, 8 weeks in a row where they have outsold Tesla. I remember, if you remember back in December, I was very like, yeah, maybe in 2025, NIO and Xpeng, at least cautiously optimistically, will outsell Tesla 10, 15, possibly 20 weeks of this year, of the 52 weeks. But right now, every single week, the first 6 weeks, they're outselling Tesla combined. That's a really interesting fact. In fact, you can see before we go into the swap infrastructure, you can see that Tesla sales are tanking across the world, and a lot has been, on the paper right now regarding Elon Musk and his activities. If that's affecting the sales, I don't know, but it's for the good for NIO and Xpeng for sure. Now going back to these numbers, you can also see if you break it down that Xpeng is actually doing the heavy lifting here. Xpeng's numbers in the pink there and NIO in the green. I mean, NIO is also, sorry, not NIO in green, that's Li Auto. NIO is in the red. Now, if you see here that week 4 and week 5 are exactly the same for all companies, that's because we got the numbers across the 2 weeks. So I just divided them in 2 because we don't know how that share divide looks like between week 4 and week 5. But it doesn't matter. The interesting fact there is that NIO struggling a little bit, especially compared to Xpeng, but all again, Xpeng is selling cheaper cars, much cheaper cars. So it's not, apples to apples comparison, but it's just interesting to see at least. Now going back to the swap infrastructure, which was the main topic of this video. And before we see the actual numbers, I think this graph is really interesting. So I made a graph between the cost of other sales and other sales. Remember, the other sales is NIO's segment where they report their kind of amongst other things as well, their swap infrastructure business, and that delta is seen in the green chart, in the green line there. And you can see that the green line has been negative for the longest time, other than 1 quarter in Q3 of 2021, but essentially every other quarter since then it's been a negative number, which means that NIO is losing money on other sales. But they are moving towards profitability, as they have said so in latest at least 6 to 8 months. And we can see now, right now, we are in we have the Q3 numbers of last year. We are expecting Q4 numbers. I think the expected earnings is around early March, still not our final date, but around the first week of March. But we can see here that expectations are roughly, according to my models, that NIO will be break even on other sales at some point later this year or early next year, right? Now, this is really interesting as we go into the final main point of the video, which was the swap infrastructure. The fleet size, I can zoom in a little bit so you guys can see the numbers better. So we have the fleet size here. I add it every month, and now we had 13,863 for January. Not that great, but much better than last year, 30-40% above last year's 10,000 or so. So good to see there, but still not the level that we would have wanted to see. Now we have the fleet size. We know the number of swap stations right now sitting around 3,110. We can also see that the average daily swap is around 105,000, which means that since we know the number of swap stations, we know the fleet size, we know the average daily swaps, we can also figure out the average swap per station, which is around 30, the low 30s right now. Break even is again 60, that's what they have said before. Now, I'm starting to have a suspicion that maybe this break even number, which is now probably 18 months old, if not 2 years old, that's what they said quite a while back, I mean, it would be realistic that this number is lower now since the scale of the swaps infrastructure is larger. I go with the 60 number is just because it's easy and safe, but would I be surprised that that number has gone down? I don't know if it's gone down like to 25, obviously not, but maybe it's down to 57. I don't know. But I think the scale would make it somewhat a, lower number there. Now, we know also that roughly the newest generation of the swap stations have 23 batteries per station. And at peak rate hours, like at the peak of the hour that is the busiest hour across that day, that was around 104,000 swaps per day across their entire swap station fleet. They had an average of 2.5 swaps per station during that peak hour, roughly. Now, we know that they have 23 batteries per station, which means that they are able to essentially help the customers to do these 2.5 swaps since they have 23 swaps. You could argue that what if the previous 2, 3, 4 hours have also been, let's say, close to 2 swaps per hour? That's possible, but still, these batteries are charging up. In fact, I tried to figure out, how many swaps are possible per station per day. If you take the 23 batteries available per station across the newer ones, and you assume that they can be charged and discharged 5 times across the day, you arrive at the number of 115-ish. I mean, I'm not sure. It could be like 90, it could be 135 by all I know. But I went with 115 or so. And we can then also calculate the number of daily swaps across all stations possible, which is around 350,000 right now, due to the 3,000 swap stations we have, or 3,110. We also know that if the swap stations increase to 4,250 by end of this year, so another 1,000 more, around 100 per month, we would be just below 500,000 maximum daily swaps across all stations possible. Again, break even at 60. This means that we are essentially assuming that there's going to be an increase of around 30% in maximum available daily swaps across all stations. How much will the fleet size increase? Well, if my calculations are correct, at this rate, if the fleet size increases from 685,000 to 1.1 million, I think that's a tough ask now, but let's say, I don't know, even there, like let's go with 1 million or 1.1 million. It means that we are going to be either in the low 40s or in the high 30s, like 38 maybe swaps per station, which also kind of points the picture that I kind of showed you, that NIO is essentially moving in the right direction in the other sales, for sure. They are definitely doing that in the other sales. So I showed you in this graph here that they are moving in the right direction, and the physics and the numbers out there kind of points to that direction, since I showed you also, the swap infrastructure business and how money they are doing. Now the question is still, despite all of this, how much will the net loss be? Because that's going to affect the stock price at the end of the day. Over the past 6 to 8, maybe even 12 months, I've been a little bit more optimistic about Xpeng's numbers, and I think we have seen that over the 52-week range, they are, over 100, almost like 150% up. Whereas NIO, if you look at the over 52-week range, they are down like 50% or so. So it's it would have been quite a wise decision to go to Xpeng. But right now, I think actually NIO is still very lowly valued. It's been lowly valued for a long time, but it's due to that the net loss is never showing any consecutive signs of improvement. But at least now, for the first time, in the past 4 years, there's a realistic outcome where the swap infrastructure starts to make money. Question is how much, after this supposed 60 break-even number swaps per station, how much money are they gonna make? That's a difficult one to calculate. Some people always mention that this swap alliance with the other brands starting to utilize in NIO swap station at the end of the year or early next year, maybe even late next year. That's obviously one positive factor, but still, I'm very confident that the number of swap stations they have currently are well enough to support the fleet size at around just under 700,000 right now. If the number of swaps per station is around 100 to 120, we are right now in the low 30s. And you could argue, sure, but what if, in the peak hours? But you can see that even at the peak hour, at the record date of around 104, 105,000 swaps per day in China, which was like, I think on yesterday or 2 days ago, they still had only 2.5 swaps across all stations for that peak hour. Now, is there, one or two or maybe 1% of the stations that are doing like 5 swaps during that hour? I mean, it's possible, it's probably realistic if you do a normal distribution statistic measurement of that. It's very realistic that there are a few stations doing that, but 95% of the stations are doing 2.5 swaps per station roughly. And that's I think that tells you a lot that management, if they wanted, could easily slow down if they wouldn't build out a single more swap station right now, and the fleet size increases to 1.1 million. Let's go change this number now. Let's say they stick at around 3,110 to the end of the year. They already jumped to almost 58 swaps per station. Obviously, they're not gonna do that. They're gonna be at close to 4,000. They said around 100 new swaps per station each month, and that's what we have seen lately. So I think these are my thinking with it, that at least for the first time in 4 years, the infrastructure is kind of moving in the right direction, for sure. The stock price is still struggling. Now it's up to NIO and the management to show that with the utilization of the swap stations going up, that they are actually able to make money on it, not lose any money on it, and cut down on the net loss. I think that's the takeaway. So hopefully we will see that in the next earnings, probably around 2-3 weeks from now. And yeah, let's see what happens. But we also know, again, don't forget that they are doing well. If you look at this graph here, they're essentially outplaying Tesla together with Xpeng in China. And if I would be a Tesla shareholder, I would maybe start to consider some other options. If you consider Li Auto, it's even worse for Tesla. And I haven't even talked about BYD or Zeekr or Link & Company, by the way, just got recently bought off by Zeekr, or any other Geely company for that matter, or even the traditional European brands. Although they are losing market share left, right, and center in China, they're still there. So I would argue that it doesn't look great for Tesla in China right now. I mean, we're on a 5 or 6 straight weeks where NIO and Xpeng comfortably, outplace Tesla. That's gonna be, some people say that the Model Y, the new one, is now starting to be able to be purchased, sure. But Onvo is launching. Onvo is fairly new, and the newer the second Onvo car is gonna be unveiled very soon. So I don't think the Tesla's let's say Model Y and Model 3 is gonna be able to have those kind of sales numbers. And in the best case scenario, they're gonna have the same number of sales that they had last year or 2023. I would find it very hard to see Tesla increase their sales in China this year by any substantial means, i.e. in a way that someone like Stephen Mark Ryan would have thought 3 or 4 years ago. Probably the largest Tesla bulls, even including myself. I hold my hand up. I was one of them 3-4 years ago. I would even maybe sometimes make Stephen Mark Ryan look conservative. But in any case, I think that a lot of us expected Tesla to just continue like 20, 30, 40% increase of sales until at least 2028, 2029. That's not been the case. So yeah, that's how it is. But anyways, that's gonna do it for today. I think it was just interesting to look a little more in detail on the swap infrastructure. Please like, subscribe. Do you think that NIO is moving in the right direction? Are we finally able to see the swap infrastructure help or reduce the net loss, and maybe that's gonna finally be the time that we see the stock actually doing something, so something of value, going at least to 8, 10, 12, I don't know. Look at what all the others have done. So yeah, please, thanks for your time, and see you in the next one.